Hey y'all, welcome back for another Lorcana chat. I've got a pretty exciting one for us today. It's going to be my first card review. And so today we're going to be talking about is Rockstar Stitch dope or nope? Apologize for any sniffles or throat clears or anything. I'm not feeling quite perfect today. Now, let's take a quick look at the card. So Stitch is a 6 cost 3/5, which so far from what we've seen 8 power is about the average for a 6 cost. Now, his first ability here is that he has Shift 4. You may pay 4 star, I guess that's ink, to play this on top of one of your Stitch characters. Now he's also a Floodborn hero alien. I'm hoping these keywords, mean something. I'm a really big tribal person, so I love building tribal decks. And with Stitch already having synergy with other Stitch cards. I'm kind of excited about that. On top of it, he has the ability Adoring Fan. So whenever you play a character with cost 2 or less, you may exert it to draw a card. Now, there's a couple of things that go into both these abilities that we don't know about, and how they play out could really dictate whether this card is dope or nope. So we're actually going to start off with the Adoring Fans ability. So the big question here, right, is whether there is summoning sickness in Lorcana. So what summoning sickness is in other games, the first turn that you play a card, a permanent a character in this case, they aren't able to act. They can't attack. They can't tap to use any abilities, anything of that nature. So if there is summoning sickness in this game, then that could have a big impact on this, because does this bypass that summoning sickness? So generally, in most card games, there is a rule that states that card text supersedes general gameplay rules. And so, what this might allow us to do is, if there is summoning sickness, when a card comes in, we can go ahead and exert it to get some kind of effect. So, that's just a bonus effect on top of something that wouldn't been able to get any effect or do anything at all, because it wouldn't have been able to tap or exert or anything. So, it's just bonus. Now, the question is, if you go back and look at my last video, the what does challenging mean? I postulated that in order to challenge a character, they need to be exerted. So the next question is does this leave your card vulnerable? And is that a valuable trade-off? So if I play a card and it doesn't get any abilities, but it's safe from being challenged, versus if I play this card and then I can exert it to draw a card, but now it is vulnerable to being challenged, is that a valuable trade-off for me? Is it worth sacrificing this card potentially for a draw? Now I think in most cases, if I had any general 1/1 and say magic or rune terror or anything of that nature, and it had a text that said, on top of everything else that it also did, it had a text box that said, this creature enters play tapped, draw a card, I'd be all about that. That's me. I think that that's a lot of awesome free value. What that would do in Magic is that would prevent that card from being able to block, which is, whereas in here it gives it the potential of being killed based off what I've speculated on. And so that is a value proposition. But I think, especially later on in the game, say, if the ink pot theory is true, and later on you have a lot of uh, extra resources, then potentially being able to funnel some of those resources into free tempo draws would be a really, really valuable thing. Or from what it sounds like is with the Stitch deck, if there's a lot of shift mechanics, then you're probably running a lot of low cost stitches. And so if you kind of bog down in these low cost, not super great value cards, then you can throw some out, get some value out of them, get some extra draws, and be able to fix your hand, and potentially give you a little bit of extra, tempo ability on top of that. So overall, I think this is a good ability. Whether it's a great ability, that's going to depend a little bit on the game and the gameplay mechanics. If there is not summoning sickness and we're giving up the ability to attack or challenge, then or use any other exertion type abilities, then I think that that could put a big stop on this ability being that valuable, because then that's another value proposition of not only are you giving up your ability to attack, you're also leaving your character vulnerable, and that's just allowing you to draw a card. So it really depends on this summoning sickness status in the game, which we don't know about. So we haven't seen any cards that have haste or anything like that, which would be able to indicate to us whether there is in fact summoning sickness or not. Effect that I really want to talk about is shift, because I think there's a lot of potential here as in how this ability could be implemented. The big thing that that has me excited on shift is that you're playing your card on top of another card. So how they implement that system could be really exciting or it could be very boring. Really just depends. So some things to think about when we're talking about placing it on top of another card is that really the shift ability is subsidized tempo. So similar to, other games like in Magic or something of that nature, where you might have a card that is low cost for its abilities, but it might have some sort of negative, such as destroy one of your creatures when this enters play, which you can play around a lot of times. And I think that there's going to be some cards like that in Lorcana as well. And we'll talk about that in a second. But basically, what it boils down to is it's not really a 4 cost 3/5, because you're subsidizing that with either a 1 or a 2, or I hope not a 3 cost, that you're playing this on top of. You're not gaining an extra character. You're replacing a character with another character. So that cost that you spent on that previous character, as well as the board state of having more characters be able to do additional things, isn't developing. You're just trading out one for another and subsidizing that cost over time. So it allows you to stay above curve as far as like stats and things of that nature, but you're behind tempo in terms of board state and just amount of creatures that are on the board. So that's something to consider when talking about this shift effect. Is you're not getting a 3/5 for 4. It's a 3/5 for 4 plus whatever the character you're putting on top of is. The other thing is that we need to talk about is what happens to the bottom card? And that's going to be the really big question when it comes to this shift mechanic. That's going to make it either super exciting or very, very boring. One thing to think about is, like I mentioned earlier, in other games, there's often you play this card and then you have to destroy another one of your creatures, and you can build decks around that. And so where you're destroying creatures that when they're destroyed give you beneficial effects, while in Lorcana I'm going to assume that the card that is underneath is not banished yet. There could still be decks that use that sacrificial mechanic as well that might play a little bit similarly. That could be pretty interesting. And the real question that I have is with this bottom card is what happens when the card is banished? So you have a couple situations. You have, say, a 1 for 1/1 Stitch. Stitch Rockstar goes on top, and then basically that 1/1 Stitch no longer exists. It doesn't interact with anything, can't activate any abilities. It essentially is just part of Stitch Rockstar and no longer does anything, has any impact in the game whatsoever. Other options are one that could be really, really crazy is, say Stitch Rockstar gets banished, then only the Stitch Rockstar card gets banished and the original card still stays on the board. So that could be an interesting mechanic as well. I think one of the other things to think about when you're talking about it being on top is that if for whatever reason the original card is exerted, then I would assume that Stitch Rockstar, when it comes into play, would also be exerted. So that's something to consider. Going back to the banished state is, well, what about, say that the Stitch that you play on top of has a when this card is banished or when this card enters the graveyard or whatever they're calling the graveyard in this game, so and so effect happens. Well, if say that the Stitch Rockstar and the bottom card beneath it both go away whenever it's banished, well, would that banished effect still take place? That's something to think about as well. That's a good question. Is, do they operate independently? Are their effects on the previous card just simply gone forever, or can they still have some kind of impact on the board? With that thought in place, I think that the coolest thing that they could do that would align with this shift mechanic, which is as you can see here, a standard keyword. So we're going to see it on more than just Stitch. There's going to be other characters that are able to shift on top of characters. That might be just a trait of Floodborns, or it could be that, it's something because Stitch does all of his shifting in lore, then he has a shift mechanic. So Maui would also have the shift mechanic potentially, and other people that transform into different things could also have the shift mechanic. Now, the thing I think would be really cool would be inherited effects. So, like from Digimon, where when you evolve on top of a Digimon, depending on what Digimon you're evolving on top of, it might have effects that your new Digimon gets. I don't know if Pokemon does anything similar or Yu-Gi-Oh, but I know Digimon does it. And I think that this shift mechanic is perfect for having some kind of inherited effect system, which would make it really, really interesting. And it would make playing these decks, I think, really fun because depending on, which of your Rockstar, which of your Stitches that have shift on top of these other characters that might have, a keyword that's malleable or shifter or something of that nature that states that when a character targets this for shift, then that character gets so and so ability, or X ability happens, or something of that nature. Then, depending on which shifter Stitches or malleable Stitches you have, and which shift Stitches you stack on top of them, it's going to change your gameplay. You're going to have fun little combos that you look for, but then you're not always going to get them, and then sometimes you're going to have to just figure it out with what you have on the board. And I think that would add a really, really fun gameplay aspect to this shift mechanic, and it's what I'm really, really hoping that Ravensburger decides to do with it. And it's not just a basic tempo play. You had a card, now you get this other card for cheaper than what it would normally cost, and the other card just goes away, and we've subsidized that tempo. I'm hoping they do something more exciting and more fun with it. If they don't, I still think that Adoring Fans and the ability to get out, a higher statted card earlier is solid, but not as good as it could be or as fun as a mechanic as it could be. Overall, what's my rating for Rockstar Stitch? Well, I'm going to give Rockstar Stitch, assuming that Ravensburger wants to make the funnest, most exciting game possible and has some really cool combos and effects with this shift mechanic, I'm giving Rockstar Stitch, largely because I want this to be the case and I want to play Stitch decks, I'm going to give Rockstar Stitch a solid dope. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know what y'all think about the Rockstar Stitch card. My ideas, if you have any other ideas about how this card could play or cool mechanics that I might be able to take advantage of, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from y'all and what y'all think. As always, keep your ink pots full and your glimmers shiny. Catch y'all next time.